All right, so far today, we've already heard about what you should be doing from industry analysts and some experts around what you should be doing about ransomware protection. You've heard some about what you could be doing given the Druva product line. But now I want to get a little more pragmatic. I want to get focused. So let's talk about what you can do and what everybody else is doing. And so joining me for this discussion today, I've got two people that have talked to literally hundreds of customers in the same position you're all in. We've got Brian Hicks, who's the Director of Data Protection in the Global Technology Office at Dell Technologies, and Jake Burns, Enterprise Strategist at AWS. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So we're going to dive in a little bit to first, I want to start with you, Brian. So we've heard a lot today around, what people should be doing. And so you've got a whole audience out here right now saying, wow, that's a lot of stuff. I should apparently be doing 27 different things, and I'm doing maybe one or two of them right now. And so whether they're on the data center, they're in the cloud, or they're somewhere in between on their journey, what are maybe, sort of the first couple of steps, maybe some quick wins they can get to build up some momentum, that maybe you can share that you've seen other customers successfully use?
Sure. It's a layered approach, right? And a layered approach kind of goes in cadence with risk levels, but there are some basic things that you can do. One is hardening, just general hygiene. That's access protocols, passwords, right? Don't accept the default setup. The next would be immutability. And it's not enough on its own, but you can pretty much every data protection system, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, you can enable immutability, right? It's not enough, though, I think, in general terms. It's a file system or presentation layer, right? I think everyone's aware that there's an A-time record. It's associated with a point in time. But, hardware or other platform controls, such as NTP clock tampering, MFA, right, is pretty much a basic these days. And encryption, right? Now, encryption doesn't protect against ransomware, but it does protect against like data leakage and the contents of the data getting out there that you don't want exposed. I think the next layer up is isolation. And that's copies on a separate domain, separate media domain, a fault domain. Its access is only available when you sync, or otherwise it's disabled, right? So that's kind of an air gap approach. There's limited access over the wire to that data. And then it's really beyond backup admin or infrastructure admin control, right? This is where I think the term zero trust comes in. I'm really taking the trust out of my backup administrator or infrastructure administrator on that secure copy, right? And then these things usually adhere to regulatory specifications like NIST 800-209, the storage infrastructure guidelines, or something like Sheltered Harbor that specifies really a vault and the specifics around its design targeted for like financial services, where they wanted to go beyond the regulations, right, about 3 years ago. And I think the last layer is really where is intelligence, but where analytics plays a huge role. And it's a layer to do full content scans, right? Look for data entropy, right, over time, not just looking at the metadata. So you got to use machine learning. A good example of that is AlphaLocker, right? It's a transparent encrypted ransomware. Can't tell the difference in a file size, can't tell the difference in a metadata, right? But when you look at the file entropy, you can tell it's definitely not the same file, right? And that's where analytics plays a role. I think you asked a couple of customer examples. I think one, we had a school district in the West Coast of the United States got hit by ransomware. They had all three layers and they were able to recover, Stephen. So analytics started to detect the entropy. So they knew something was going on and then it hit, right? And then they were able to recover by deploying all three layers. Another customer, we had a manufacturer in the Midwest. They got hit. They only had two layers installed, right? They had the immutability and the isolation. They didn't have the analytics, which again is okay. You got to weigh that risk. But it wiped out all their infrastructure, their servers, everything. but they were able to recover even without the analytics. So, I hate to say it depends. There's a risk variable, but those layers obviously add on different capability, costs, and risk. Now, I'll close with this. The downside of what we see in the purview is, Dell Technologies has an entire incident response team, and that's born out of a necessity, right? So we see a lot of things where organizations aren't deploying any layer that I just described, and that's where we either Dell or another organization has to go in and do recovery, which can take time, cost, resources, and all those things that just aren't available in these days.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And so what I'm hearing, and I think for everybody in the audience, right, you can't just go after one layer and say, I'm done. And you don't want to platinum plate that layer. It's actually better to do at least a decent job across the multiple layers, because the threats are going to hit you in multiple ways. So now, Jake, obviously, being with AWS, you see people on all stages of their cloud journeys, from, purely cloud native to people who are just starting their cloud journey. And I think something everybody worries about is, well, as I move to cloud, how do I make sure that not just I'm as safe as I was on premises, but that I'm safer and that I can build some of this in? So what are the things in AWS that you sort of recommend as baseline security? And then maybe what are one or two other, special ones that you try to remind people of and say, these are a couple of secret sauce things that can make you even better off?
Yeah, so definitely moving to cloud should certainly improve your security posture significantly. But there are certain best practices that you do need to follow in order to make that happen. So we have at AWS something called the shared responsibility model. And so essentially what that means is, AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. The customer is responsible for security in the cloud. And so we take roughly half of the things that customers had to worry about on premises in terms of security and compliance, and we handle that for them. So examples of that would be physical security, for example, or the security of the hypervisor. Those are things that we completely own. And what that does is it allows customers to focus on those things that they're still responsible for, their portion of that shared responsibility model. And so they're able to concentrate their efforts in those areas. But not only that, they're able to take advantage of a rich set of tools that AWS provides in order to help them manage those things. So you get a little bit of a 1-2 punch to kind of accelerate your security. Brian talked earlier about isolation. I think that's an important concept as well. One of my favorite ways to provide that isolation and kind of limit that blast radius within AWS is using AWS accounts. And so, you have identity and access management, IAM as a service from AWS. A best practice is to grant least privilege. So give only the amount of access needed to each individual. And then if you separate your workloads into different accounts with their own IAM policies, that could further limit and isolate any possible thing that could happen on top of that. So there's definitely layers to protection. And of course, there's other things like encryption. We have numerous encryption services that make encryption very easy, both in flight and at rest. And so customers should take advantage of that. And finally, like logging is a very important thing as well. And you can even do logging in a separate account to further isolate your logging. So there's several things. I could speak all day about the best practices that you could do and the tools that AWS provides to help do that.
And I got to say, more and more of the customers I meet are absolutely leveraging, those multiple AWS accounts exactly for that reason. And it's been, I think, a really good trend, right? Because that blast radius is such a critical thing. So now, Brian, pivoting back to you, because you mentioned the layers and getting people to invest, and you talked about using the NIST framework and all these different ways. And so now you've got a whole audience here saying, okay, we get it. This is what we need to be doing. This is where we need to invest. And then the question that we're all asking ourselves is, but how do I get the business to fund this? How do I make this a reality? Ideally before the ransomware strikes rather than after. What are some of the tips you might give them?
Well, these discussions are happening right now in the boardroom, right? Given the current security climate. So the CISO has now been elevated to a critical role. If he didn't have a critical role before, he has a seat in the boardroom now, and his center of gravity is how can any solution or architecture really lower the organizational risk, right? And that's his primary role given the security climate. So we kind of tend to look at the CISO right now, and you have to go to the CISO or the risk team and start to develop a plan around your solution or architecture of what you want to do. So the changing regulatory guidelines and legislation are also kind of omnipresent, right? I think you look at the recent executive Biden order after the Colonial Pipeline, which is now saying, hey, you need to do encryption and you got to have MFA. And that's just not for government, right, entities. That's for anybody that kind of interacts with the government, the U.S. federal government, which is pretty broad in nature, right? So that has a wide kind of impact. But then to round that out, it's the security and infrastructure teams, right? Demonstrating how any prospective solution, process, or architecture can significantly lower that risk, right? Demonstrate it. I mentioned the alpha locker, right? Show them what happens when you throw some of these things into the paradigm, and then the result, I think, is a key strategy, right? I think everyone has an answer to it. Hey, we've got a solution, but showing what happens when something occurs really goes a long way to not only the CISO to lower that risk, but showing the security and the infrastructure teams that this really can help them from a solution perspective. The last piece is a cyber resilience strategy has become something that appears to be a perpetual cultural shift, right? That requires not only technology, which we're talking about here a lot, but people and process, right? And people and process are the hardest to change culturally. So having a training plan, quite frankly, I know it sounds basic, but just putting a piece of technology and saying, hey, this is going to solve all our challenges is probably not the case, right? I'll give you an example. At Dell Technologies, we actually have a training that deploys phishing and other insider schemes to kind of trick employees into taking the bait. Quite frankly, I have a lot of very intelligent people on my team that have taken the bait, that understand these things, but yet they've taken the bait, right? So helping people understand what to do by showing them, right, and giving them training will help lower your security posture, right, and lower the risk. So people, process, technology, start with the CISO, right? He has the budget right now. He's got boardroom attention, and then bring that demonstrable solution to the security and infrastructure teams to get buy-in.
Makes sense. So yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from Brian is first off, you need to scare the living daylights out of your organization, and then it is a people, process, technology kind of thing. And so it's interesting to me, Jake, because the other time I hear people, process, and technology come out a lot is people who are trying to do their cloud journey, right? Because again, it's not just let me go spin up an EC2 instance in a VPC and voila, I'm cloud ready. So as you see people trying to make that cloud transition, and they're trying to bring this security mindset in, I guess what are some of your what's some of the advice to make sure that as they make this transition, they're successful both from a business standpoint and a security standpoint?
Yeah, I totally agree with Brian. You know, people are going to be the weak link in this process, and you should work towards education and solving the problem from that point of view. But then at the other point, like it's never going to be solved completely. The people will always kind of act. They'll always be that weak link, in my opinion. So we use technology to act as guardrails to act as a prevention measure. For those mistakes to happen before they happen. So it's about prevention. So the difference in cloud, though, from on-prem is, on-prem, you have an info security team, you have a CISO, but in the cloud, security is basically everybody's job. One of the advantages of utilizing AWS is that security is built into every service that we build. And so instead of having kind of like a soft-boiled egg or a hard-boiled egg, where you have, that soft inside and you're just trying to protect it at the perimeter, In the cloud, the correct kind of pattern or the most successful pattern that we see is to build security into every single layer, every single service, every single microservice, every single API call. And the great thing about using AWS is that, we build that into every one of those tools. And so if you utilize those security features of each one of our tools, then you can have a much better security posture. You can even put a firewall around it if you want to, but you're going to have security at every layer. You're not going to have that soft-boiled egg effect. As we say at AWS, don't build it in, don't bolt it on, is essentially kind of our advice. Now, in terms of, protecting your data from ransomware and those types of things, AWS makes that easy as well, because we make it just so much easier to replicate your data. And, prevention is the best thing, but of course you want to have contingencies and you want to have a layered approach. You want to be fully protected. And so replicating your data and encrypting your data and having it in multiple places in multiple regions under different security controls, perhaps under a third-party product like Druva, every way that you can make it more difficult for a single attacker to compromise that that data. If you have other copies available, then that's going to give you that additional protection. So I would do all of the above. That would be my advice.
There you go. So just to wrap this up again for everybody in the audience, everybody out there is struggling with this, right? No matter where you are in your cloud journey, no matter where you are in terms of your sort of cybersecurity journey, this is not a single point in the road. This is not I'm just going to go solve this problem. Okay, I'm done. I'm going to go move on to something else. This is a constant thing. And so some of the takeaways I certainly took were, one, obviously you are going to want some sort of data protection solution that, as Brian said, gives you layers, separate security access, off-site or some alternate site, encrypted, immutable. These are really key things. I think as Jake reiterated as well, you're going to want this to be embedded in everything you're doing. This is not something you want to bolt on. This is something that's got to be built in. And because the more you try to retrofit, the more it becomes a DIY project, the more likely you are to make mistakes. And so I think for me and hopefully for everybody in the audience, the first thing is, look, don't panic, right? Everybody's in the same position you are. It's going to be okay. The second is start putting one foot in front of the other. You start building those layers that we talked about. And the third is look for people you trust that can help you to build these solutions, because no matter where you are in that shared responsibility model, there are people out there who are willing to help you meet you halfway to make sure your organization's safe. So with that, I'd like to say, again, thank you to Brian from Dell Technologies. Thank you to Jake from AWS. And to everybody, can't wait to see what's up next in our agenda.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.